has concluded. Questions without notice. The member for Franklin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Is Senator Abetz a fit and proper person to represent the government on the Parliamentary Joint Committee of Intelligence and Security, given the Speaker of the Tasmanian Parliament quoted him as saying, "As for that Higgins girl, anybody who is so disgustingly drunk, who would sleep with anybody, could have slept with one of our spies and put the security of our nation at risk." Do you believe Speaker Higgins?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I note the statement that has been issued by Senator Abetz. Mr Speaker, where he has said that Ms Hickey's defamatory allegations under parliamentary privilege are categorically denied. He says that allegations of rape are serious matters and have always been treated as such by him. He says sexual assault is an issue on which he says, "I've been consistently outspoken, including domestic violence," and he goes on to make a number of statements, and I would refer the member to the Senator's statement, as it's very clear that he completely denies. And, Mr Speaker, those statements.
The member for Reid.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is delivering ongoing assistance to support communities impacted by devastating flooding, and how this assistance will help these communities to recover?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Reid for her question as a fellow member in this House from New South Wales. She will be also feeling, as all members from right across this chamber, but particularly those from New South Wales, will be very mindful of what's occurring right across our state. We also know that these very serious flood events and storm events have not just affected New South Wales, but many other parts of the country, particularly in south-east Queensland. And as we're seeing the inland flooding now also start to impact, these are issues of great concern. Earlier today, I had the opportunity to take an aerial tour of the flood-affected areas in the Hawkesbury, and then meet straight after that with those at the RAF Richmond base who have been involved in directing and supporting the community effort and the operations out of RAF. In the time I had available this morning, I'm looking forward to returning to not only these areas, but many other areas when I have the opportunity once Parliament rises. I was able to be there this morning with the Emergency Management Director-General, Joe Buffoni, who's doing a very good job, Mr Speaker. And we were able to address a number of issues while we're there. One of those was the matter that was raised by the Minister for Emergency Management yesterday, and that was to be able to confirm that the New South Wales Government was moving on the urgent issue of supplies in North Richmond. We were advised this morning that barges were being used for that, but the federal government, through the Defence Forces, has heavy lifting assets available, and they are available in New South Wales. They haven't been requested, but they are there to support them should they need that support. Mr Speaker, when I was there, I could see the water almost literally lapping at the fence of the RAF Richmond base, Mr Speaker. The expanse of water that went right across that region was quite devastating to see, and to see the homes, only their roofs and those of outsheds and things like that for the producers in that area, it was very clear that when these waters subside, and they will, albeit it's happening all too slowly, because as we went past Warragamba Dam, we could see the water continuing to surge out of that dam, Mr Speaker, and it will be some time before those waters recede. But it highlighted, Mr Speaker, the work that is ahead of us when it comes to the clean-up and the recovery. And the Defence Operation Flood Assist has been put in place, and other members, I'm sure, will have the opportunity to speak about those things. But the ingenuity I saw as farm machinery and other assets and other pieces of heavy equipment have been able to be moved to high ground in very short periods of time to limit the damage, but the damage will indeed be great, and the government will be supporting each and step of the way as we go through the clean-up and the recovery process in partnership with the New South Wales Government. I mentioned one other point, Mr Speaker, and that is that the Services Australia, 1,000 staff on emergency lines, processed are now a total of $13.5 million payments under the payment assistance there to over 10,800 Australians. We will continue to work with all local members on the ground, Mr Speaker, at every opportunity, both state and federal, to ensure that those communities get the support and assistance they need.
And the Leader of the Opposition on brief indulgence.
On brief indulgence, Mr Speaker, we certainly stand, everyone in this parliament, with the communities who are going through such distress in these flood-affected communities. I would ask the Prime Minister, not formally, but if he does travel back to that area that's been so affected in Richmond and Hawkesbury, then he contact the local member there, Susan Templeman, who's on the ground working with those communities.
Members on my left, I just do need to say an indulgence is granted to associate yourself with the remarks, not to add political commentary. I do give leeway. I gave leeway. I won't tolerate people interjecting while I address the House. Full stop. Which is why, on an issue like this, I didn't ask the Prime Minister to resume his seat when the time expired. And I just want to make that clear. That is, indulgence is granted on a basis that there's a compact, that it's to associate yourself with the remarks. And if that occurs, continually, you'll find indulgence will be much rarer. The member for Franklin.
My question is again to the Prime Minister. Is Senator Abetz a fit and proper person to represent the government on the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, given the Speaker of the Tasmanian Parliament quoted him responding to the allegations of serious sexual assault against the Attorney-General as saying, yes, it was the First Law Officer of the nation, Christian Porter, but not to worry, the woman is dead and the law will protect him. Do you believe her?
I'm just going to point out that these questions are in danger of breaching the standing orders, in as much as members cannot reflect on other members or senators except by way of substantive motion. So I'm just pointing that out to be helpful. I am going to allow the question, but I'm pointing it out as a caution for questions, but also for any other contributions in other forms of the House. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, the comments that have been referred to by the Speaker are obviously repugnant, Mr. Speaker, but what I can only refer to is the absolute denial of those statements by Senator Abetz. Now, I was not a party to this conversation, Mr. Speaker. I was not a party to this conversation. There were two persons who are allegedly party to this conversation. I was not one of them, nor was the member who asked the question, Mr. Speaker. The matter has been...
The member for Moreton will leave under 94A. The Prime Minister will continue.
Absolutely denied, Mr. Speaker, by Senator Abetz, and that is a matter of public record. And, Mr. Speaker, he will continue to serve in the role that he has. Senator Abetz has been a significant contributor to this House, to the chamber, opposite Mr. Speaker, I should say, to the Senate, over a long period of time, Mr. Speaker. He has served his state and he has served his nation. He has served as a minister in governments, Mr. Speaker, both in the Howard government and over the term of this coalition government since they were elected, Mr. Speaker. So he will continue to serve, Mr. Speaker, in the roles that he now serves at within the Senate. And I can only refer to his complete denial of those allegations, Mr. Speaker. But the actual comments that, Mr. Speaker, the actual comments that have been quoted, Mr. Speaker, of course the government would find completely and utterly repugnant.
The member for Mallee.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister inform the House how the Morrison-McCormack government is supporting those communities impacted by flooding in regional Australia?
The Deputy Prime Minister.
I do thank the member for Mallee for her question, acknowledge that we've had substantial and severe rain in parts of Victoria, indeed many parts of eastern Australia, across the country, and it's been tragic to see some of the consequences of that rainfall. It wasn't that long ago we were in the country's most substantial dry spell for a long time, and now we have flooding rains. While it's positive to see clear skies over parts of New South Wales today, some parts of New South Wales, the risk of existing and increasing floodwaters persists, and those rising waters have not yet, unfortunately, peaked, Mr Speaker. This reprieve from rain does not mitigate the risk which has been building over the past week. This being the case, I would remind people again, as the Prime Minister has consistently done, so to not drive into those flooded roadways, to ensure that they don't go surfing, to ensure that they follow the local emergency personnel. I've heard Minister Littleproud say it. It is just common sense, but we need to reiterate that you are not only placing your own life at risk for those people who do that, you're placing the lives indeed of those who may well come to endeavour to rescue you. Road closures are occurring across New South Wales, and I would encourage people travelling to check with local councils if they're going on a major trip, but certainly even in a local situation. Significant areas of Australia, as I say, remain flooded. 40,000 evacuation orders are in place, and it's too early at this stage to know what damage has been done, but assess the damage will happen, that assessment will take place, and indeed we will build back, and we will build back better. And we will make sure that when those flood waters recede, yeah, getting on with it. We will indeed make sure that we will build back better. Our supply chains and freight delivery, well, one thing we can agree on, and that is our truckies have been magnificent. Our truckies have been magnificent, and I thank them for restocking those supermarket shelves. Indeed, I thank them for continuing the delivery of the vaccine rollout. And only spoke to Saul Resnick of DHL yesterday. Appreciate too that Linfox are playing their part. DHL has delivered nearly 600,000 doses of both Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines around Australia and travelled nearly 3 million kilometres in doing so. Our truckies have been magnificent. They will, as I say, continue to do that. They will continue to step up. They will continue to answer the challenge that they have been placed upon them during COVID, during this situation, and they'll keep those wheels of transport rolling, and I do thank them again.
The member for Gorton.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The 10 Network has reported government staffers allegedly brought in sex workers to Parliament House for a current government MP. What steps has the Prime Minister taken to investigate these very serious allegations concerning a current member of the government, which constitute a blackmail risk and potentially jeopardise national security?
The Prime Minister has the call. Members on my left. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, the matter that the member has raised in his question is a very serious matter. And, Mr Speaker, I can only add little to what I said to him yesterday. The processes that we were following yesterday was to make contact with the whistleblower on this issue and encourage them to bring that information forward that would allow us to take that matter further. Now, I'm advised that after that contact has been made, that the whistleblower at this point is not in a position to do that, and that makes this issue very difficult to pursue, Mr Speaker.
Members on my left.
Very difficult to pursue when the individual who has alleged these matters, and we're not in a position to know the veracity or truth of that one way or another. And so I would only encourage, Mr Speaker, that individual, if they have information or if anyone has information on that, to bring it forward so it can be properly addressed. Now, Mr Speaker, in relation to other matters that were raised in these reports, then we would take the opportunity at the appropriate time with the individual who has already left the employment of the government as a staff member, Mr Speaker. That individual is currently under care.
Member for Dunkley,
and when they're in a position to be able to talk more about these matters, Mr Speaker, then I think that would be the appropriate time in which to have that conversation with that individual, and we'll take that opportunity when it presents.
The member for Warringah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister. Yesterday morning you told the Australian people that you were listening, but with respect, you are not. Because if you were, you would have supported to immediately debate the Sex Discrimination Amendment. The Australian Law Council has publicly advised that sexual harassment should be prohibited in all circumstances. If you don't agree, and you appeared not to yesterday, please tell us, in what circumstances should sexual harassment be okay?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, sexual harassment should never be okay. It shouldn't be okay in this place. It shouldn't be okay in any place, Mr Speaker. And there are steps that the government is going to be taking to address that matter, and our response to the work program that has been recommended to us by the Sex Discrimination Committee at Respect at Work. And Mr Speaker, I have personally taken on the responsibility of ensuring this response is in place very soon. It will be made available before the budget, Mr Speaker. I'm working with the Acting Attorney-General and the Assistant Minister to the Attorney-General to ensure that that response, which goes to the very matters that you raise, and the remedies that can be put in place by this parliament, Mr Speaker. That report also goes to many actions that can be undertaken, I hope, also by state and territory governments where these matters are also subject to their laws. And I would hope, Mr Speaker, that that would also be taken up by those jurisdictions, and I look forward to raising those matters when National Cabinet meets after the Easter break. So I agree, it has no place anywhere, Mr Speaker. Now, it is not for me to make commentary about what judgments people make about me and whether I have listened or not, Mr Speaker. I can only say to the women of Australia is this, as I said yesterday. What Australian women are looking for from me, Mr Speaker, is to demonstrate my understanding of the issues that they have raised and that I am listening to the great pain that they have been enduring, Mr Speaker. And I acknowledge that there is further work, not only for me to do, Mr Speaker, but for many people in this place, and that is what I am committed to doing. I'm not going to stand here at this dispatch box and do what blokes do and say, well, I'm a bloke, I've got the solution to your problem, and here it is, and here's the fix. That would be to approach this issue, Mr Speaker, exactly
Members
in the
on my
paradigm.
left.
What I must do first, Mr.
The members
Speaker,
for Cooper and
is
Shortland
demonstrate
will
that
cease
I'm
interjecting.
listening and that I'm understanding the pain that so many Australian women are feeling, Mr. Speaker.
And Cooper
and that's
will
what
leave
I'm committed to
Understanding Order
doing.
94A. Yes, the both of you. I'm not going to tolerate members being warned and continuing to interject. As the Prime Minister concluded his answer, the Prime Minister has. The member for Stirling.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer remind the House how the Morrison government's strong leadership and our resilient economy are delivering on our commitment to generate more and more jobs for all Australians? And is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Stirling for his question and acknowledge his tremendous contribution to good policy on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, and as an outstanding advocate for his community. And as somebody who spent time in the Australian Defence Force, in the private sector, and has seen more than 19,000 people across his electorate graduate from JobKeeper, Mr Speaker. 80% of those who have been on JobKeeper in the electorate of Stirling have now graduated, Mr Speaker. And he understands how the Australian economy, facing its single largest economic shock since the Great Depression, has rebounded strongly. We saw economic growth of 3.1% in the December quarter. For the first time since records began back in 1959, we have seen 2 consecutive quarters of economic growth above 3%. And what was particularly pleasing is that it's the private sector that is helping to lead this recovery, with incentives that the Morrison government has put in place, like Home Builder and like the immediate expensing, Mr Speaker. We've seen dwelling investment up, we've seen business investment up, we've seen household consumption up, and we've seen motor vehicle sales up, Mr Speaker. And we've also seen our labour market be tremendously resilient, with the unemployment rate falling to 5.8%. 88,700 jobs created in the month of February alone. And all those jobs were full-time jobs, Mr Speaker. More than 80% of those jobs went to women, and more than 40% of those jobs went to young people. And despite those on the other side of the House trying to talk down the Australian economy, we have seen its tremendous resilience. and we've seen 2.7 million Australians graduate off JobKeeper. And even as JobKeeper comes to an end in March, we will see continued economic support from the Morrison government. Already $9 billion in tax cuts has gone through to households, with another $12 billion to go. We've seen more money going into infrastructure. We've seen 340,000 training places.
Member for Fenner will cease interjecting.
Are there any alternative policies? And we know that those opposites stand for one thing: higher taxes, Mr Speaker. We all remember, indeed the Australian people remember, $387 billion of higher taxes. When the member for Rankin called them the top end of town. When the member for Maribyrnong talked about retirees sitting at the back of their yachts. And when the member for McMahon said, if you don't like our policy, don't vote for it, Mr Speaker. Well, they remember those higher taxes on superannuation, on income, on housing and on retirees, and they voted against Labor's high-taxing, high-spending policies. They voted for the coalition, and we have delivered lower taxes and more jobs.
Members on both sides, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Yesterday in the House, the Prime Minister defended his use of an alleged confidential complaint about workplace misconduct inside a media organisation to dismiss questions. Given his midnight apology, which came only after the front pages of today's newspapers were published, will the Prime Minister now commit to give straight answers to simple questions about his handling of a reported sexual assault just metres from his office?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Leader of the Opposition has made reference to the apology, Mr Speaker, that I have already provided last night, Mr Speaker, as I arrived in Richmond late last night, Mr Speaker, and it was not done in the way that was characterised by the Leader of the Opposition, Mr Speaker. It was not characterised that. I had not seen those things that the Leader of the Opposition asserts that I have, Mr Speaker. I had reflected, Mr Speaker, I had reflected very strongly over the course of that evening, Mr Speaker, on the matters that were raised in that press conference yesterday. And, Mr Speaker, I have apologised unreservedly for what I did in bringing that matter into that press conference and to raising something I should never have raised, and that was done, Mr Speaker, not respecting those individuals who are at the centre of that particular issue. Now, Mr Speaker, I've given that apology. I've given that apology honestly and openly, Mr Speaker, and I will continue where there are situations in that nature where I believe that is necessary, then I will do that, Mr Speaker, and I will do it honestly, Mr Speaker. If the Leader of the Opposition wants to take these matters and pursue them for some partisan advantage, that's up to him, Mr Speaker. I'm going to keep focusing on the issues that we have to focus on to make this country safer for women.
Members on my left, the member for Curtin has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Women. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is working to improve the safety of women and children who have been victims of family violence?
The Minister representing the Minister for Women.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Curtin for her question and note her strong commitment to women's safety. And can I also mention, because the member for Boothby has told us that in the gallery here we have 3 Indigenous women who have visited the Parliament today, Jacinta Price, Sharon Long and Becky Long, and they have spoken quietly but powerfully on the importance of women's safety in Indigenous communities. And may I offer my reassurance that your communities are our communities and we hear your voices. Mr Speaker, preventing family violence has been a priority of this government because the scourge of family violence has no place in our society. Today, the government has introduced to the Parliament the Family Law Amendment Federal Family Violence Orders Bill, which will add further support to addressing family violence by ensuring greater protections for those who have experienced family violence. And this legislation will establish federal family violence orders to be made by family law courts. The orders will operate in the same way as state and territory.
Member for Barton. The member for Barton will cease interjecting. The Minister has the call.
The orders will operate in the same way as state and territory domestic violence orders and can include restrictions on a person's behaviours, their communications or their movements. A breach of an order would be a Commonwealth criminal offence punishable by up to 2 years' imprisonment. And this is really important, Mr Speaker, because while the family law courts can already make protection orders, currently the victim must bring a civil action against the offender in court in order to enforce it.
Member for Whitlam.
I'm going to take the interjection from the member for Whitlam and ask for the Chief Justice of the Family Court's words to be read into my answer. And the Chief Justice of the Family Court and Federal Circuit Court has said that the recent careless comments that infer that somehow Federal Circuit Court judges are generalists and that them hearing family law cases is somehow putting children or families at risk. So can I ask the opposition not to make those careless comments?
Members on my left. Members on both sides. The member for Griffith. The member for Goldstein.
And I could, Mr Speaker, be political about the numbers of family court judges on both sides, but I'm not going to do that because on this subject we should never be political. Now, in terms of the legislation,
member for Griffith.
Mr Speaker, this reform means that breaches of these new federal family violence orders will no longer be treated as a civil matter, but a crime to be enforced by police and prosecuted in the court.
The member for Lilly is warned. I'm going to make the point members are well aware of. I'm simply not going to put up with members ignoring my rulings. No matter what the issue, I will not put up with members ignoring my rulings. I'm issuing a general warning. Those members who express extreme surprise when they're ejected for continually interjecting are disrupting the House. And I could go through the number of members on both sides who never interject. And some of the language that's coming forward is completely unacceptable. And the member for Lilly will not tell people to sit down. The member for Ballarat. And before I call the member for Ballarat, I'm issuing a general warning. The member for Ballarat has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I ask the Prime Minister for the 13th time. Has the Prime Minister asked his staff if they sought to undermine Brittany Higgins' loved ones?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, on this matter, as it's been raised, as the member has referred to previous questions, Mr Speaker, my answer is the same as on those occasions, Mr Speaker, and I have nothing to further add.
The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is assuring the health of all Australians by securing domestically manufactured vaccines?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Boothby in particular for her strong work on topics such as endometriosis, stillbirth awareness, along with others on both sides of this chamber and in both houses of this parliament. One fundamental point to begin the day is that, again, we've been fortunate. 0 community cases of COVID-19 across Australia. 0 lives lost for the 52nd day this year. 47,000 tests, and Australians continue to turn out in large numbers. And at the same time, we see 482,000 cases around the world, over 10,000 lives lost in one day still, 14 months after this pandemic began. And what we see, in particular against that background, is that Australia will not be fully protected, despite our enormous work, until the world is fully protected. So as part of that, we have a fundamental role in protecting Australians. And right at the core of that is the decision that the Prime Minister and the National Security Committee of Cabinet made in August to secure Australian-made vaccines. It was a difficult program to bring to pass. The challenges were enormous, and yet we've been able to secure 50 million vaccines produced by CSL in Victoria for all Australians. Very importantly, the TGA on Sunday approved the manufacturing processes and the plant. Last night, they approved the first of the batches, and those batches will now be continuously available as we roll out those 50 million doses. Very significantly, as we have moved to phase 1B this week, we've seen a massive escalation in the number of vaccinations. Last week there were 116,000 vaccinations, well above the phase 1A target of 80,000 a week. On Monday, as we moved into phase 1B, which included our elderly and our immunocompromised, and I was thrilled to see today the Minister for Indigenous Affairs and his counterpart, the member for Barton, help lead the Indigenous program with their vaccinations today. But on Monday there were 30,000 vaccinations. Yet yesterday there were 46,000 vaccinations to take it to 358,000 vaccinations nationwide. 46,000 in one day. And those numbers over the coming weeks will continue to grow as our general practices, with the supplies that we're able to provide, are now able to offer every Australian progressively the capacity for vaccination. So as the supplies allow, the vaccines will be administered. And what we've seen in the last 48 hours is evidence of that on a grand scale, which will ultimately be about saving lives and protecting lives.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. Last Thursday, the Prime Minister repeatedly misled the Parliament about the Gatchins review. What does it say about the government that even the Prime Minister doesn't feel the need to take responsibility for misleading Parliament as his own ministerial standards require?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The assertion put forward by the Leader of the Opposition is just simply not true, Mr Speaker. It's just simply not true. He comes to the dispatch box, Mr Speaker. He says things that are untrue. Now, that reflects on him, Mr Speaker, not on me, Mr Speaker. It reflects on the Leader of the Opposition that he would seek to make such false statements. It is indeed the Leader of the Opposition who is guilty of the things he's accusing me of, Mr Speaker, and bringing it forward in that way. And, Mr Speaker, he should cease doing it.
The member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Drought and Emergency Management. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is providing support and assistance to communities across the East Coast that have continued to battle the effects of devastating flooding? How will the Morrison government assist with community recovery efforts?
The Minister for Emergency Management.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Robertson for a question, acknowledge the fact that now her electorate is becoming inundated with floodwaters, and acknowledge the leadership of all the members, those that are here and those that are back with their electorates. Can I also acknowledge the fact that many have reached out with individual issues that we have been able to resolve through Emergency Management Australia, particularly in New South Wales, working with Resilience New South Wales, that have made a difference to real people. But we've got to understand, Mr Speaker, that while the sun's shining, it is still unsafe. It is unsafe for people to go near these floodwaters, and they are not just putting themselves at risk, but they are putting their families at risk, and more importantly, they are also putting at risk those men and women that many who are volunteers are out there trying to protect them and protect the properties of those that have been impacted. We've had 922 rescues to date, and we all have a responsibility in this, every one of us, and those people we are pleading with. You need to stay away, because you are not just putting at risk the rescue of men and women who are being forced to escape from these waters, but you're also impeding the relief efforts. And that's why yesterday we initiated the National Coordination Mechanism, and to be able to provide essentials to those communities that have been locked off. And today I'm pleased to say that there'll be 50 pallets from Coles that will get through to North Richmond, and we are making every effort to encourage Resilience New South Wales to take up our offer of further aerial support to be able to get more stores into those communities, because we are still uncertain as to the speed in which those waters will abate over the Hawkesbury. We need to make sure that those communities feel the comfort and knowledge that they will be able to get what they need. And that's complemented by the fact that we have approved a request from the New South Wales Government for ADF support. There are 3 extra helicopters that have been provided to them, plus there'll be a surge of 290 ADF personnel tomorrow when they are deployed, and that will increase to 700 over the coming couple of days as water continues to abate and we can get them in to help in the clean-up. We've also ensured that we have engaged Shane Stone, who currently leads our North Queensland and Drought Recovery Agency, as an eminent Australian, to be able to look at the long-term recovery. And that can only happen once the waters abate and we allow the New South Wales officials to make assessments about the extent of that damage. We will work with New South Wales in understanding that the support that we provide is adequate in repairing the damage, not just to public infrastructure, but to those personal properties that have been impacted. And Shane Stone will work underneath the Director-General of Emergency Management of Australia to make sure that those programs are rolled out in conjunction with Resilience New South Wales, and I acknowledge Shane Fitzsimmons as the Commissioner for that. This will be a long road to recovery, but no matter the road, the Australian Government will be there with them all the way.
The member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Last night the Senate heard that on the 26th of March 2019, just 3 days after the reported sexual assault of Brittany Higgins, that Finance advised the office of the former Special Minister of State, now the Immigration Minister, that Senator Reynolds' suite had been accessed after hours. As a matter of government policy, is the Special Minister of State told about after-hours access to every ministerial office on every occasion? Why was the Minister told on this occasion?
No, members will not interject. And I make very clear I will make use not only of 94A, depending on whether the members are being continually interjecting, or I will name a member. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I refer to the statement you made just before question time in relation to this matter, which is currently under investigation by the Australian Federal Police. The Police Commissioner has made very public his views in relation to this matter, and I think in the spirit of your words before question time, Mr Speaker, the opposition should reflect on this question, on the words of Commissioner Kershaw, and frankly move on to the next question.
The Manager of Opposition Business. Members, I'm just going to say, as I deliberate on this point of order, members interjecting not only do not help, they make it almost impossible. They are not making a valuable contribution. I am labouring the point. Can I be any clearer? Members interjecting who have been interjecting, do you need any clarification? Am I signalling well enough what will happen? The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. To the point of order raised by the Leader of the House, and I refer also to your statement earlier today. The question that's just been asked goes directly to matters that were asked in Senate estimates yesterday and were allowed in Senate estimates yesterday, the Senate having received the same advice as what you've received today. Now, I respect we don't take notice of the other place, but the context of that question, word for word in terms of those issues, they were all allowed within the Parliamentary Committee yesterday. I certainly don't take your statement today as meaning that we cannot ask questions relating to the government's response to the various investigations that are taking place. And I would simply remind the long history that while this is the first time, and you refer that this particular crime has happened within the parliamentary precincts, it is not the first time there has been a criminal investigation into what might have occurred within the parliamentary precincts. It's happened with respect to the use and uploading of documents from computers within the building. It's happened with respect to phone calls being made when they ought not to have been made to the media concerning an AFP raid. So the concept of it happening within the parliamentary precincts itself is not new, and the question simply goes to the government response subsequent to what the AFP is directly investigating.
Okay, I thank both the Leader of the House and the Manager of Opposition Business, and I won't read the statement again. I'd encourage members to familiarise themselves with it. I made it just before the 90-second statement started. There are a number of aspects to the statement. The point I would just emphasise is that it's a statement I made obviously after considering the conventions and the practice, but also the discussion that the President of the Senate and I had with the AFP, where they've made the point that commentary and reference to facts in issue, and this is their words, can complicate the investigation. I'm now ad-libbing, of course. The point of the statement was members have freedom of speech and parliamentary privilege here in this chamber, but they also have responsibility. And members shouldn't think that some things they say might not prejudice an investigation. So I'm making that point to all members. With respect to this question, I have a different problem with it, and that is as a matter of responsibility, without going through all the details. In terms of access to offices, let me just state what I'm sure most members know, that that's a matter for the presiding officers, and the way access to offices works is simply that if members of staff require access to offices out of hours, for your office, member for Sydney, if they're employed on your staff and they have a pass, they're given access. And so that is important information. In terms of whether the Prime Minister's got a capacity to answer that, that can't prevent the question being asked, but I'm just pointing out, just as a matter of administration, if I heard the question rightly. Yes, the Manager of Opposition Business.
Just to assist, if I may, the question goes specifically to the Department of Finance advising the office of the former Special Minister of State, and to that policy, not to the policy of the access itself.
Sure, but I think didn't it also say every occasion they're out of it?
No, but it's whether or not the advice goes
from the
department to the minister.
It might save time. Just
it's not my question.
Fair point.
Mr Speaker, the question goes to, as a matter of government policy, is the Special Minister of State told about after-hours access to every ministerial office on every occasion? And then the final sentence of the question is, why was the minister told on this occasion?
Yeah, so what I'm going to point out is
unusual?
The government can't have a policy because it's administered by the Department of Parliamentary Services. So whether they've got one or not, on terms of out-of-hours access, that's true, but I'm going to allow the question, but I'm just pointing out what I think is an important fact. I mean, the government has some responsibilities, of course, many, but when it comes to Parliament House and access out of hours, the policy is actually the policy of each individual member and senator. Each member, employ staff, they issue them with a pass and they're granted automatic access. Okay, and if a member... That's right, but as a matter of course, every time someone comes into the building after working hours, as I've said, I'm just trying to make the practical point. I'm allowing the question, but just pointing out the difference in administration. The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker. And without repeating some of the matters that have already been raised regarding what the Secretary of Department of Finance has already said in evidence to the Senate Economics Committee, where they said they'd been advised by the AFP that caution needs to be exercised in responding to questions regarding these matters, Mr Speaker, and they have cautioned. They have said in their own statement and they've been advised that they should not go into the events of that time, Mr Speaker, particularly while this investigation is ongoing. What I will undertake to do for the member is to provide a response to that in writing, Mr Speaker, to the House after taking further advice on these issues, and to ensure that I would not say anything here that might compromise any other investigation. I think that would be the responsible thing to do.
Thank you. And I call the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Defence. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is providing critical ADF support to those communities impacted by flooding?
The Minister has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. And like all of us, he's watching at the moment with this tragedy unfolding, and we need to make sure that we respond in whatever way we can, Mr Speaker. We want to make sure that the emergency services workers in New South Wales receive all the support that they need, and certainly the Australian Defence Force will step up to provide that, Mr Speaker. I can report to the House, tragically, the Daily Telegraph reports at the moment that a person has been recovered from a vehicle that had been washed away, Mr Speaker, and the advice from the New South Wales Police is that the person was trapped in floodwaters in Sydney's northwest today. About 6:25 a.m, emergency services responded to reports that a car was trapped in floodwaters. Officers from the Hills Police Area Command attended the scene along with SES Flood Rescue to search for the vehicle. At 1:10 p.m. today, the vehicle was found tragically with a man's body inside. The man has not been formally identified, and that investigation continues. And it underscores, Mr Speaker, the messages that everybody from the New South Wales Premier, the Prime Minister down have been issuing over recent days, and that is, please do not enter these floodwaters. I'm advised by the Australian Defence Force that yesterday they deployed 2 helicopters in New South Wales, and RAF Richmond was activated as an evacuation centre. 8 civilians on 4 flights arrived at RAF Richmond Air Base via ambulance aeromedical evacuation, including 2 pregnant women and others who required medical attention. And it shows, Mr Speaker, the breadth of the response that's required, the human reality, Mr Speaker, at a time like this, and we just need to continue to work very closely with our counterparts, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland, to provide a supplement of the support that is requested and that would be reasonably provided to the authorities in New South Wales. As the Minister for Emergency Management pointed out in his earlier answer, we've seen close to 200 ADF personnel deployed over the last 24 hours, or put on 24 hours notice to move for support. We expect the number of defence personnel to climb potentially above 700 in coming days. And as we know, once the floodwaters reside, once the emergency and the immediate threat is dealt with, people will want to get back into their homes and want to get back into their businesses as quickly as possible. And we want to help people get back to that position. And so the recovery will be incredibly important, and the assets of the Australian Defence Force, including the amazing skill and expertise within the ranks of the Defence Force, will be deployed to help those communities return back to normal as quickly as possible.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has confirmed that he has received advice from the Solicitor-General about the Attorney-General's portfolio responsibilities. He has also confirmed that he has sought advice from his department in relation to the Attorney-General and ministerial standards. Is the Prime Minister preparing to make his Attorney-General a part-time minister, or is he preparing to drop him altogether?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I am considering that advice with my department secretary, Mr Speaker, in terms of the application against the ministerial guidelines, and when I've concluded that assessment, Mr Speaker, I'll make a determination and I'll make an announcement at that time.
The member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and Minister for Government Services. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is ensuring critical assistance and supports are reaching flood-affected Australians? And Minister, how can Australians access this support now?
The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and Minister for Government Services.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the member for Moncrieff for her question and acknowledge the work she's doing with the Industry Minister as our city in the Gold Coast is inundated and rivers and creeks are now flooding, and thank her for the continual effort she's doing serving the city. It's a wet east coast of Australia, Mr Speaker. But in response to the unprecedented rain events, Services Australia is now coordinating an all-of-nation response across our agency. As the Prime Minister said, we've started the day with over 1,000 Services Australian staff operating phones and processing claims. We're now in the process of surging that to 2,500 staff to ensure all Australians are getting the services they need. To give the House up-to-the-minute number of claims processed, the CEO has just informed me we've now gone past 13,000 claims having been processed and $17 million in payments across the Australian Government Disaster Relief Payment to needy Australians, $1,000 per adult and $400 per children. To ensure this rate of effort is maintained for as long as we need to, Services Australia are now training public servants from the Australian Taxation Office, Department of Social Services and Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to also join in the national undertaking, and can I thank the respective ministers for releasing some of their staff to us. Can I encourage any Australian impacted to call the Australian Government Emergency Information Line on 180-2266 to claim either disaster recovery allowance or indeed the disaster recovery payment. To give the House an idea of the volume of calls coming through, as at a minute or two ago from the start of day, over 8,500 Australians have now called and claimed from this morning. The average speed of answer, so the average wait an Australian is waiting, is 4.5 minutes. So I'd encourage all Australians, if they're in need and looking for that support, to get on those phone lines. I'll be open till 8 p.m. tonight. Those lines will not close until every single Australian who has called that number has been answered. Services Australia will also be at 3 evacuation centres today at Port Macquarie Golf Club, Laurelton United Services Club and the Bonny Hills Conference Centre. We were at 4 evacuation centres yesterday. We will continue to be in each and every evacuation centre and recovery centres if the states put them together where invited and where needed. At the same time, Australians are reminded that debt has been paused for all affected Australians till September, as has mutual obligations for the time being. For those Australians in the NDIS, be advised that the agency and local area coordinators will be reaching out proactively as we speak to engage with each and every one of them to check and ensure their welfare. Can I encourage all Australians, though, wherever you are in flood-affected areas, if you are impacted and eligible, please call that emergency line 180-2266.
The member for Solomon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Northern Territory Working Women's Centre helps women with workplace issues, including sexual harassment. The Respect at Work report recommended an increase in funding for centres like these, but instead the NT Working Women's Centre has been defunded. Why?
The Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. As I indicated in response to a question from the member for Warringah, the government will be making our response to the Respect at Work set of recommendations of the Sex Discrimination Commissioner before the budget, Mr Speaker. That has been personally taken up by me as Prime Minister, working with the Acting Attorney-General as well as the Assistant Minister to the Attorney-General, and that will be addressing the many recommendations that are set out in that report, including the ones that the one that you have referred to in your question. At the same time, The government, as the Minister representing the Minister for Women has responded in this House, the government is working with the states and territories because in many cases the sorts of services that you are referring to are joint funded with state and territory governments, Mr Speaker, and that's why it's so important that as we go to the next National Action Plan, that these funding arrangements are put together and work together, as they have been now for many years, under the process started, rightly, by Prime Minister Gillard, supported by the coalition while in opposition, and taken forward while in government, which has included $1 billion in additional funding for the National Action Plan program, Mr Speaker, for the National Action Plan program. And, Mr Speaker, so the very services that you're referring to we do believe are important, and I'm sure that this will be able to be addressed in the program that we're now engaged in. It is true that many programs that are funded across the Commonwealth have programs funding that go for a set period of time, and then ongoing funding is determined as it approaches the conclusion of that funding period. That was indeed the case for many of the programs that were run by Labor when in government. One that I remember very well was universal access for early childhood education, Mr Speaker, or the National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness, Mr Speaker. And these were agreements that in government, particularly in relation to the Homelessness Agreement, we have made permanent funding arrangements. So it's an important area of funding. I'll be addressing the many matters in the Respect at Work report within the weeks ahead, Mr Speaker, and I look forward to being able to update members on that when we next meet.
The member for Ford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business. Will the Minister update the House on how the Morrison government is continuing to back Australian small business, including those impacted by flooding, and help them grow and create jobs as part of the recovery from COVID-19?
The Minister representing the Minister for Employment, Skills, Small and Family Business.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And I know that many areas in his electorate in South East Queensland have been impacted by the floodwaters in recent days, just as they have been in my own electorate and many other electorates across particularly the east coast of Australia. Mr Speaker, floodwaters are expected to rise today, so our thoughts go to those who are involved in having to save their businesses, their homes that are involved in sandbagging. We're particularly conscious of the fact that the recovery is likely to not just take days, it will take weeks. And for those businesses as well as the households that have been affected, this is going to be an extremely difficult time for them. But we have seen how resilient our small businesses are. Our businesses have been affected by fire, by the pandemic, by floods, and for many of those businesses, they have been affected by all three. But for all of our businesses out there, they have been able to show amazing resilience as they have constantly fought back from each of these issues that have been put to them over the past 14, 15 months, and quite frankly, some of our businesses have continuously faced hardship for many, many years now. There is a significant amount of support that is being provided by the federal government, and we will continue to provide that support as and when it is needed. But importantly, through my own portfolio area, Oz Industry, we already have on the ground over 70 advisors who are out there reaching out to businesses to support them to access where funding may be available to get them through the immediate hardships that they are facing, but then what they can do to make sure that they recover in the shortest possible time. So we will continue to support all of our small businesses. We understand how difficult it is every single day for a small business, and we understand how difficult the circumstances are in which they find themselves now. Mr Speaker, one thing that I am absolutely sure of is that Australians always band together in times of a crisis, and this is absolutely no different. So I know that everyone in this House is mindful of the challenges that those in flood-affected communities are facing, and our hearts collectively go out to all of them. But I do know that our communities will rally together, they will support each other, they will get through this, and I'd just like them to know that this government will support them every step of the way.
The member for Rankin.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. There are more than 1 million Australians still on JobKeeper, and many are still dealing with the effects of border closures, delayed vaccinations and now floods. Treasury's told Senate estimates today it expects 100,000 to 150,000 jobs could be lost after the Treasurer cuts JobKeeper this weekend. Why is the government leaving so many workers behind? How many of them could he afford to support beyond this weekend if he hadn't wasted so much money on companies which didn't need it?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, again the member for Rankin selectively quotes the Secretary of the Treasury, because when the Secretary of the Treasury made that statement, he did also continue to say this does not mean that there will be a commensurate increase in unemployment. Oh, Mr Speaker. Now, the Secretary for Treasury did make a number of statements, including, and this I would like to put these into Hansard, Mr Speaker. The Secretary of Treasury said the relatively smooth transition from JobKeeper 1 to JobKeeper 2 gives us reason to believe that the effects will again be moderated by the strong economic and labour market recovery.
The member for Rankin will leave under 94A. Treasurer, we'll just wait for a second. The Treasurer has the call.
The relatively smooth transition from JobKeeper 1 to JobKeeper 2 gives us reason to believe the effects will again be moderated by the strong economic and labour market recovery, the ongoing easing of restrictions, the changes that businesses have been making to their operating models and broader policy support measures that are in place. Now, Mr Speaker, the Secretary of the Treasury went on to say it's important to consider labour market disruptions at the end of JobKeeper in the context of the normal flows into and out of employment, Mr Speaker. Went on to say, so the flow of people out of JobKeeper positions is within the normal flows of employment that we regularly observe. Importantly, this is what the Secretary of the Treasury told the committee today. In our view, it is appropriate for the program, that is JobKeeper, to end as other support measures take effect and to allow the economy to continue adjusting. And went on to say, as noted in Treasury's JobKeeper review, the program has a number of features that create adverse incentives which are likely to become more pronounced.
Member for Fenner will leave under
recovers.
Standing Order 94A.
In particular, it distorts wage relativities, it dampens incentives to work, it hampers labour mobility and the reallocation of workers to more productive roles, and it keeps businesses afloat that would not be viable without ongoing support. And then, Mr Speaker, the Secretary of the Treasury told the committee today, our view is that the adjustment away from JobKeeper will be manageable and that the employment will continue to increase over the course of this year. Now, Mr Speaker, this is what the Secretary of the Treasury has told the committee today, that their advice to the government is that JobKeeper will end and that the trajectory of the unemployment rate will continue to be down over the course of the year, Mr Speaker. We have delivered more jobs, Mr Speaker, and we have helped to cushion the blow from the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression. This is what we have done. This is what we will continue to do.
The member for Barker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister assisting the Minister for Trade, Investment and Minister for Decentralisation and Regional Education. Will the Minister please update the House on how the Morrison government is driving jobs and economic prosperity in the regions as we continue to recover from the COVID-19 recession?
The Minister for Trade and Investment and Minister for Decentralisation and Regional Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Barker for his question and for his very strong advocacy for country Australia. Mr Speaker, it was only recently that the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister representing our coalition, and indeed many in this House today, attended the memorial service for the late, great Doug Anthony in Tweed Heads. And as Doug himself once said, we want industry to boom again, to produce again, and to employ again. And on this side of the House, Mr Speaker, that's what we want for country Australia, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, we know that the Treasurer is really enjoying those good news job stats at the moment, and why wouldn't he? But, Treasurer, I've got some more stats for you today that have just been released that relate to country Australia. He loves the stats. He does love the stats. The stats today reveal that there are currently 56,510 regional job vacancies advertised online. And, Treasurer, this is the highest level since 2011. And the member for Barker will be particularly pleased to know that regional South Australia is up 4.8%, regional New South Wales is up 3.6%, regional Queensland up 3.5%, and regional Victoria is up 3.5% as well. But, Treasurer, the good news does not stop here. I have more stats for him, and I think members opposite should listen. In regional Australia, for the month of February, regional exports rose by 11.2% to $4.2 billion compared to February 2020. So on this side of the House, we're putting in place the policies to drive growth, investment and prosperity in country Australia, Mr Speaker. Take the budget. The 2021 regional package in the budget delivered 350 new programs and initiatives to rebuild our regional economies. And there was $110 billion for much-needed infrastructure, representing 30,000 jobs. You should listen. A little less chirp and a little more listening will deliver better outcomes for country Australia.
Members on both sides. Minister can just pause.
They're not interested.
The Minister can pause for a second. Minister can pause for a second. Members will cease interjecting, even though some members on my left are interjecting in an attempt to defend me. Can I tell you, they don't need to. They don't need to. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, we've got the policies to drive investment and production in the bush. Take our Securing Raw Materials program, $35 million to get firms to move from the cities to the bush, set up where their supply chains are and secure those supply chains with grants of up to $5 million if they bring the jobs with them. We're securing the supply chains and driving growth and investment in the bush. With the Minister for Industry, Science and Technology, we've just launched our $6 million Regional Cooperative Research Centre project initiative, which will support research projects in regional Australia. Mr Speaker, Doug did it before, we're doing it now. We're driving growth and investment and prosperity in country Australia. We say to our nation,
Minister's
come and
time
join
has
us.
concluded. I call the member for Whitlam.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer, and we've just heard how much he likes statistics. Well, the government said it would have 4 million vaccinations done by the time JobKeeper is cut this month. Why has the government delivered 10% of vaccinations but is delivering 100% of the JobKeeper cuts?
The Treasurer has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, the member for Rankin didn't bother to listen to the answer, got chucked out. The member for Fenner didn't bother to listen to the answer, got chucked out. So the third batsman is trying his luck here, Mr Speaker. The reality is more than 200,000 vaccines have been delivered across the country, and we have always said that when it comes to JobKeeper, it will go to the end of March. Now, Mr Speaker, initially JobKeeper was a 6-month program, and we extended it for another 6 months. 2.7 million Australian workers have graduated from JobKeeper. But when JobKeeper comes to an end, there are other support measures put in place by the Morrison government which are designed to create jobs, including tax cuts, Mr Speaker. $9 billion already, another $12 billion to go. Infrastructure projects that have been brought forward, 340,000 training places, apprenticeship wage subsidy at 50%, which has already been oversubscribed in the first 5 months, Mr Speaker. These are programs designed to continue to create jobs across the economy. We've seen the unemployment rate come down. We've seen 88,700 jobs created in February. They were all full-time jobs, and we'll continue to do everything we can to support the Australian economy at this difficult time.
The member for Wentworth.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister representing the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. Will the Minister please advise the House on how the Morrison government is helping our Papua New Guinean family respond to the COVID-19 pandemic?
The Minister representing the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Wentworth for his question and his great passion and interest in international affairs, and especially in our relationship with PNG. And Mr Speaker, I don't think there is a more important relationship than Australia has with PNG. And PNG has reported over 4,100 confirmed cases, with over 2,000 cases reported since the 27th of February. Australia will provide 8,000 vaccines from our own supply to protect PNG's frontline health workers, and these vaccines arrived in PNG yesterday. A further AUSMAT team also arrived in Port Moresby yesterday. It is providing advice on vaccine rollout, cold chain logistics, storage and pre-departure testing. And for everyone who's involved with that AUSMAT team, we obviously thank them for the very important role they're playing in helping and supporting PNG at this time. We are also lobbying for the EU to release 1 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine purchased by Australia, so we could also provide those to PNG. And I know the Prime Minister has made representations on this front. I myself have made representations on this front, and we hope that the EU will be able to release those 1 million doses so that we can provide them to the PNG government in this time of need. We're also providing additional PPE, including 1 million surgical masks, 200,000 respirator masks, 100,000 sets of gowns, goggles, gloves and hand sanitiser, 20,000 face shields and 200 non-invasive ventilators. And if more equipment or material of this type is needed, obviously we stand ready to provide further support to PNG at this time. We've also funded the reopening of the Rita Flynn Testing and Isolation Facility. It reopened on the 5th of March to add 45 COVID beds, and we're working with St John's PNG to transform Turama Aquatic Park into a care and isolation facility which will have capacity for 120 low to mild patients. Over the past year, we have reprioritised over $60 million in development assistance to support PNG's response to COVID. And Mr Speaker, I'd just like to conclude by saying I'm sure I speak for the whole House in wishing the PNG government and their people all the best as they deal with COVID-19. It's obviously an incredibly challenging time for them at the moment, but they should know that this parliament and the Australian people stand with them in their hour of need.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.